All right, so what I'm going to do first and foremost is just switch back to my camera to show you my finished one on the wall. It's really hard to show it up close to the camera on my computer, so I'm using my external camera. And that is the one that I had actually finished before last week's class. And I have now done 2 blocks for my new one, and I am alternating those. So I'm going to go back to my camera here, and there is the first one that I actually did in last week's class.
Oh, cute.
All right, very cute.
Yeah.
And then I thought, well, you know, Christmas is red and green. So the second one is green. And then I'm going to alternate red, green, red, green.
Oh,
for my 5 blocks. Yeah. And that one will probably go to my daughter because she loves snowmen and nutcrackers and Father Christmases. She loves that. So she can put that up in her house. All right. So ladies, what we are going to do now is talk about the trimming. Now, I know, Carol, you have trimmed all your blocks. Jeannie, are you still needing to trim them?
I do have to trim them.
Okay, so I am going to move the camera to my cutting table. Let me do this. All right, let me see. Okay, it's good. All right, so what we're going to do here, and I'm just going to unplug my headphones. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, the trouble is I can't hear you.
Oh.
So I think I will need to still be attached to my headphones. Okay, so I have got my snowman here, and I've got my rotary cutter and my ruler. Now this one has already been trimmed, and let's see if we can get the camera a little bit better to see more of what I'm doing. Let's do that so you're not now looking at it upside down or sideways. Okay, so there is my one that I've already cut, and you will see on the back here that I cut the batting away all the way to that little stitching that was done in the embroidery hoop. So all that's left now is my cutaway and my fabric, all right, around the edge, because this is going to be the seam of your runner or wall hanging, whatever it is you're making. So now if we look here, I have cut away the batting. Now I wanted to say a little word on that, is that I was a bit lazy in class last week, and so I did not actually double check the recording. Yes. Okay, so I did not trim that batting during the embroidery process. That is what the notes that come with the design suggests you do. And it may seem like I was lazy last week, and I probably was. The main thing being that you've got to stop during the embroidery, and you've got to take the hoop off the machine, because it's very hard to sort of cut around that hoop if it's still attached to the machine. And you do have to be careful as well that you don't unhoop. But in all honesty, I think it's better, because you'll notice here that I was a naughty girl, and I actually, let me see, I actually cut my fabric. Do you see that? Okay, so you run the risk of doing that. I will make sure that gets caught into my seam, but you want to avoid that happening. So I have trimmed away that batting now, but maybe you didn't trim it away during the embroidery process. So this is what I do. I turn it onto the reverse side. So in other words, the back is facing up, and I flip both the fabric away to the front, and I flip the cutaway to the back. So what would be sticking out here where my finger is would be the batting. And then I would take my rotary cutting ruler and we'll tuck it away here. I actually think it's easier to do it while it's in the hoop, but I'm telling you now in case you were like me and didn't do that. And so let's just pull it this way. And so you do have to make really sure that you tuck it away. Otherwise, you'll have happen what happened to me and you'll cut your fabric. And then you're going to bring your rotary cutter up to the edge here, and you're going to slice with your rotary cutter. Okay?
Mhm.
And now we have got to this stage where I still need to trim away my stabilizer, because I did this one, I did it in the hoop. So that's why there is no batting outside of my seam line. So now what I need to do, and I like to cut it at 1/2 of an inch. I think the notes tell you 1/4 of an inch. Am I right?
No, I think it's at a half. I did a half.
Okay. I like to do it at 1/2 of an inch. And then I have to try and get this all lined up as best I can. Sometimes the stitches have pulled a little, and then what I'll do is I'll just actually pull them out. You know, I'll unpick them if they're going to be in my way. Like over here, this satin stitch has pulled my stitching towards it, and so it's going to show on the outside of my seam. So what I will do is I will just unpick those few stitches. All right, so that's one side of my snowman cut. And that is over there where I will unpick some of that stitching. Because it's white, I think if I bring it closer to the camera, you'll see. Do you see it's white? And
Yes.
I threaded up with white because, of course, the first color was the snowman, which was white. But with hindsight, I should really have done those first couple of colors in blue that matched my background, and then it wouldn't have been so noticeable, and I probably would not have needed to unpick a couple of stitches here and there. All right, so I've got the second side cut. I'm now going to cut my third side, which is the bottom of my snowman. And I'm going to cut then the fourth side, which is the top of my snowman. Okay, now all these little bits and pieces that I have just cut off, I do not throw them in the garbage. I think I mentioned this last week. I have a big paper bag, and it goes into this big paper bag, and the place that we were giving finished pillows to, they don't want them anymore because they've got too many of them, and they're just finding they haven't got the storage for more. So I am in the process of going to a cat shelter, dog shelter near where I live, and I'm going to see if they want them for kitty and doggy beds. So I'm still keeping all my little scraps. Okay, so one thing I do want to mention before we continue is that did you go to the Sew and Learn or Sew with Liz Thompson Facebook page, my Facebook group? Because what Donna May did, and I know she's got something to do with her quilting guild this morning, so she said she probably wouldn't be here. She completely finished her blocks, and she completely put them all together, and she's made 5 placemats. I think she might have done more than 5. And what she did was she pieced at the bottom, and she made her snowman a whole body snowman. So she rounded out the bottom of him. and it looks quite nice. So if you haven't seen it yet, you might want to go and check it out. All right, so my machine is set up for embroidery. So I am going to move that, and I think I will take you back to me because I don't want you to be seeing the camera wobbling all over the place. Okay. There we go. And I have got black thread in my machine, which is good enough. I'm not going to worry too much about that. And I think I'm going to put on this foot, which is my walking foot. One of my walking feet. I quite like it because it's nice and narrow. So it's like a slim walking foot and it does the job, and we've got quite a few layers there. So I prefer to have a walking foot, but if you've got your 1/4 inch foot or your regular sewing foot on, that is also totally okay. So I am now ready to start sewing my blocks together. So I will give you a moment or two and you can tell me when you're ready. What we'll need is 2 blocks trimmed and your sewing machine set up for regular sewing or 1/4 inch sewing if your machine does that. And I think I'm going to get that seam ripper out and unpick some of those stitches that are obviously going to be in the way.
Pick a mark.
So how close to the snowman do we trim our block?
Half
Up
an
to-
inch.
A 1/2 inch.
Actually, half an inch from that inner line of stitching. Okay, if I show you my camera, right, let's do it here. Do you see there was like 2 lines of stitching? Let me get, yeah, there. And you're going to trim it a half an inch from that inner line of stitching.
Okay.
Mine is actually more than a half an inch. So I'll have to do something about moving my needle position, I think. But right now I need to get rid of that white stitching because it's going to show quite badly if I don't.
So couldn't you trim your block along with the cutaway?
Yes, that's what I've done. I've now got my block and my cutaway that will go into my seam. You just don't want the batting in the seam because the batting will make the seam very thick and then it's not going to lie nicely and flat. Okay? So that's the reason for trimming the batting away. And as I said, the instructions ask you to do that during the embroidery, and I was a bit lazy last week. I did not. So I had to then trim it away afterwards and peel back my stabilizer and fabric so that they didn't get cut, and actually they did get cut. All right, so now I have got, I really should have my nice seam ripper that gathers all these little threads together on the end of it. I don't know where it is though. Your things migrate all over the house. Last night I was cutting out bras. So I had a huge box of fabric and lace in the lounge. And then my husband said, "Oh, let's go to bed and we'll watch television in bed." And I had to drag all of that stuff with me to the bedroom and perch it on the bedside table because I hadn't finished doing what I was doing. So it's no small wonder I'm looking for something and I have no idea where I took it. Could be on the floor in my bedroom. It could be in the lounge next to where I sit when I watch TV. Anyway, those stitches are now out. And I'm thinking that I want the stitches on the other side out too. So I am going to, it really was a mistake for me to do the stitching in white. It shows up too much. I should have done it in blue. And I had forgotten.
We're going to sew the cutaway and the material along with another square, right? Another snowman?
Correct.
Oh.
Exactly correct.
Okay.
So I will continue doing my unpicking in a moment, but what you're going to do is you've got your two blocks and you're going to place them right sides together. And you're going to take a pin. Let me just see where my pins are. Of course, they migrated with me. Give me one sec. Okay, so what you're going to do, this will help you a lot, is you're going to take your pin and you're going to put it into the corner. Do you see that there? Let me bring it closer for you.
Mhm.
And focus. Okay, so you're going to put that in the corner and then you're going to look at the other one and you're going to put your pin in the corner there. And then that lines your corner point up. All right.
Mhm.
And so you're going to put a pin there and then you can do that down the side of the snowman. You can put your pin in and then open it up and check you putting your pin into the stitching or just one side of the stitching. It doesn't really matter whether it's on the outside or the inside. And you're going to keep going all the way down with your pins to the bottom. And then what you're going to need to do is you're going, well, we'll do that step once you've pinned. So when you're pinned, let me know and I'll show you the next step. I just need to do a little bit more unpicking here. Why I've got an inner line, you probably have only got one line, is because I put my fabric and my batting down at the same time. And so I got 2 rows of stitching. One is only supposed to be for the batting, but mine was all together. So I got 2 rows of stitching on my fabric. So it's probably a good thing that I tell you the wrong things I did, because then that helps you not to do the same thing.
You left stitching lengths at the default 2.4.
To tell you the honest truth, you in a sense are doing 1/4 inch piecing. And when we do 1/4 inch piecing of blocks, we usually have a shorter stitch. So quilters tend to like 1.8. That is a real pain to unpick. So I think it's probably better to do it at 2.
That's what I do.
Yeah. You know, if you're somebody who never makes mistakes, well, I'm happy for you. I wished I was one of those people, but I'm not. So I prefer to do my piecing at about a stitch length of 2 millimeters. And then that way, if I do make a mistake, it's not absolutely impossible to unpick that. Well, not impossible, but really fiddly. Okay, So now I can pin. Now that I've got the stitching removed. And then when you do stitch, what I would suggest is that you go fairly slowly, because that's when mistakes happen. If you're going at speed, you're more likely to have a speed wobble. And so I would suggest you go slowly, and I would suggest that you decide where you're going to stitch. I think that the best place is just inside that line of stitching that was there, because if you go on the outside of it, you're going to see that stitching once you open your block up. So I would say to stitch on the inside of that line, just on the inside of that line. So if I bring it up here to show you at the camera, and we will focus so that you can see up close. Do you see here? There's my stitching line.
Mhm.
All right, I'm going to stitch just inside that line. All right.
Mhm.
Okay, and then you can go for it. What color have you got in your needle? Well, that's up to you. I am stitching with black because it happens to be what I had in the machine, and that'll be okay with my blue. And then I need to take my pins out on a regular basis so that I don't end up with a problem. All right, and I'm going to lower my speed because it was far too fast. Actually, just as well that I'm doing it in black, because I think you're going to be able to see it nice and clearly on the camera. And I'm going to stitch all the way down. And there we have it. I have got my black stitching all the way down just inside my white line. And once you've done your stitching, you will open it out to the front and you will have a look and see if you're happy with it. I was not. So I stitched a second line a little bit deeper of a seam. Just, I mean, not even a 1/16 of an inch, but I had a little bit down the middle where the felt was not always kind of too close. So there it is. And so now I have got my two stitched together. And I will do a nice close up here for you so that you can see my seam. Okay. Once you've got to that stage, let me know and I will tell you the next step.
I stitched another line too.
Yeah, it's quite hard to know exactly, and in all honesty, we do get slippage on our blocks. I used a little bit of spray glue. You can also baste your blocks. I did not baste them, and that might be part of the problem because the instructions in the pattern did not call for basting. But there was no two ways about it. Over here, where there's quite a lot of stitching, over here, that one definitely pulled in quite a bit there. So I found I had to get a little bit of a deeper seam over here in the middle of my blocks. Okay, when you're ready, let me know.
Okay.
And I will get to the ironing board because that is the next step.
We're ready.
And you, Jeannie, how are you doing?
No, I'm just pinning them together so I can sew.
Okay. All right, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to show the ironing and then you can catch up. And Carol is not sitting doing nothing. All right, so if you want, I can certainly show it again just now. So we need to move the camera again. Don't look, it's about to cease it.
All right.
Camera there. There we go. All right, so I'm now at my ironing board and I have got the 2 snowmen that I have sewn together. And there is my seam down the middle. So now obviously I want this as flat as I can have. And I've only just switched my iron on. I've got one of those little mini Aliso irons. I bought it not so long ago because I have another iron, but it's very heavy. And unfortunately, it was 3 years ago, last month, that I was at the Fall Creative in Toronto, working for Janome, and I lifted a very heavy suitcase and swung it into the boot of my car, the trunk of my car, and I did something to my elbow. It was a re-injury because I'd injured it years before. And it's still 3 years later, my elbow kills me. Most days it kills me, even to drive like long distance, it really hurts. So having this lighter, smaller iron does help me. I know the weight of an iron is a good thing, but for my elbow, it's not. So you can do 2 things when it comes to the ironing. Okay, if you look on the back, you'll see that here is my seam. And I could come here and iron the seam open, or I could iron it to one side. And I think what you need to do is have a look at it. I'm actually going to do something different over here because I sewed in a little more than I had planned on sewing in. I've got a bit of fairly thick felt sticking out into my seam. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut away that felt to make my seam not so bulky. And I'm cutting right next to my stitching. Okay, and then that can go in my little baggie for the doggy beds. So what I would suggest you do is open it out. And I think, Carol, you and I, because we did a second line of stitching, it's probably going to be better for us to flip it to one side. But if it feels flatter and thinner for you to flip it to one, to open it and press the seam open, that's also fine. And now you're going to give it a jolly good press. And I've got some steam on my iron, so I'm going to give it a shot of steam. I know a lot of quilters get their knickers in a twist about steam, but I do not. I think sometimes steam is needed. And you probably won't be able to see it in the camera, but I've got little clouds of steam floating upwards. And so now I have my seam pressed towards my red snowman, which was actually my first snowman. Then I'm going to flip it over to the other side. And I'm now going to give you a little piece of a hint or tip, whatever you want to call it. I have got something very sheer here. Do you see this? This is the very best pressing cloth you will ever use. and it is really quite simple. It's not that inexpensive. It is silk organza, not regular organza. That is polyester, and it's not the same as silk organza. So I found some silk organza, and I can't remember how much it was a meter because I bought this such a long time ago. In fact, I think I bought 2 meters at the time. But do you see how wonderful it is? Because once you put it down on top of what you're pressing, you can see through it. And so I could see very clearly if I wasn't pressing where I should be pressing, or if something had got twisted or curled. And so now on the front of my snowman, I am going to press my seam again. Definitely do it on the back first, and now you move it to the front. And that is my silk organza pressing cloth. It frays like crazy. So look at what I did. I used my either pinking shears, but
Right.
I have one of those little zigzag blades for my rotary cutter, a little scallop blade or a zigzag pinking blade, and then go all the way around. You do not want to turn it over and turn it over and do a seam around the edge. If you do that, you run the risk of ironing little thick parts into your work. It's too thick if you do that, so do not hem it. Rather just use pinking shears all the way around the edge, and that cuts down on the fraying. It doesn't completely get rid of the fraying. You can see here it's fraying a bit. All right, but what I'll do if I get too many fuzzies on the edge, I'll just run my rotary cutter along that again with the pinking blade, and I'm back in business. So that is my little hint for the day. Maybe there'll be more hints for the day as we go along, but I really can't manage without my silk organza pressing cloth. And there are my snowmen now. They have been pressed, and they are ready to have a third snowman attached. Only I don't have a third snowman because I haven't done that yet. But you guys will have. So you will be able to do exactly the same as what you've just done. And you can add snowman number 3 and then move on to all of your snowmen.
Have you ever used the acorn precision piecing?
No, I don't have it, but I teach every year at the Saskatchewan Stitches Conference. And there was a gentleman in Vancouver who was a Benina sewing technician, and him and his wife have moved to Saskatoon, and they now teach at that conference, and I've seen how it works, and I believe it's really good, but I can't say that I've used it myself. What do you think, Carol?
Excellent. It's excellent.
Yeah, it's kind of like a starch, isn't it?
Well, it's for getting your seams
Perfect.
really,
Yeah,
and it comes, you get a pen
yeah,
like this, and it's got a little point thing on it.
right,
Down the end of through the seam,
yeah,
and it's not really a starch, but it's got
it does something that makes
Yeah.
the fabric nice and flat. Yeah, and then you iron after that, don't you?
yes,
Okay.
and it makes your seam so flat. It's excellent.
Okay. I am booked to teach again in June at the Stitches conference, and I think she's making my classes live classes. She will also have a camera, so there'll be online classes for people who don't want to travel. This will be in June next year.
Okay.
End of May, beginning of June. So I'll make sure I stock up on that when I'm there, because I'm pretty sure they'll be teaching again for her. I think it's Bernie and
yes.
oh, what's her name?
I can't remember, but I took a class and they showed this on it, and it was since then I use it all the time.
Yeah. Well, it's good to hear that, because I know that
And they're Canadian.
yes, they are. Very much so.
Yeah.
And they live in Saskatoon now. They used to
Yeah.
live here in Vancouver. Shelley, that's her name.
Yes.
Bernie and Shelley.
Okay. Put mine together.
Oh, look at that. That looks really good. And are all your backgrounds that blue?
Yes.
Okay. That's what I decided to do this time, was make my backgrounds all the same. And then the first one, I alternated them. They were two different color turquoises or aquas.
Ah,
But this time I've got a sort of a darker blue. It's a paisley. And it'll be my snowmen who will alternate, but the background will stay the same. There's so many options and variations, aren't there?
oh, I know.
And how are you doing, Jeannie? Good?
I'm doing good. I just attached my third one.
Oh, you're speeding
Oh.
along. Great.
Oh.
All right, go ahead and do the fourth one.
Well, I have to iron this one.
Oh, yeah. So did you hear what Carol was saying? That
Yes.
there is that product. Have you come across it?
Did I? No.
Okay. It is a Canadian company. And if you're interested, I can give you a contact of where you can get some.
Okay.
It's really very good. I haven't got around to buying any yet because I tend to be doing a lot of embroidery and not so much piecing. But now that I'm putting all these blocks together, it sounds like I do need to get some.
Sounds like a good product.
It's excellent.
And it's pretty unique.
What's the name of it again?
It's called Acorn Precision Piecing Products.
Wow. Yeah, I've not heard of that.
Okay, well, when I send you the recording,
Okay.
I'll include the contact details of where you can buy it. And I know that she will ship because she just shipped me a pattern and it arrived yesterday. And she
Aw.
shipped it and I hadn't even paid. I tell you, I felt really bad. So I quickly phoned her yesterday and said, you need to put this through on my credit card.
Okay.
I am here, ladies. Just let me know if you have any questions. I haven't run away. So ladies, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the recording because there's no use recording us just sewing. But if you have a question, just let me know and I will start recording again so that any questions are also on the recording. Okay?
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to repeat what I just said for the benefit of the recording. I'd forgotten to switch the recording back on. Is when you get to the point where, and you ladies can just start with your thinking about your sashing and your borders, are you going to have a wall hanging? Are you going to have a table runner? Or are you going to have some other project? For example, Donna May made separate placemats and she added quite a bit of fabric to the sides of each snowman so that was then wide enough for a placemat. And if you want to see pictures of her finished ones, it is on the Facebook page. In fact, I think she sent me a picture once she'd done each block, but then subsequently she sent me a picture of them all finished. So I will post that later today. So that's just giving you another idea. There's absolutely no reason why you can't use these blocks individually as placemats or as a nice large mug rug. I can't imagine spilling coffee or tea on my snowman, but it is an option. So for the snowman, I used shwe fabric from Celeste, and I'll put the details of who she is. She lives in Ontario. She's an ex-South African like me, and she sells this delightful fabric. And I did the border, and I chose to do yellow cornerstones, and I bound it with the same fabric as the border. On the indoor plants one, which is also a Sweet Pea Designs, that one I chose to separate each block with a batik fabric, which I then did with a narrow border all the way around, an inner border, same width and same fabric as the sashing. And then I added quite a wide border above and below. I think it was about 7 inches. And then down the side here, I added, and this was a different batik fabric. So it was also a green, very close in color, but a different, it looks like a fern actually, printed on that batik. And then it was bound with the same fabric as the sashing and the inner border. So that is just giving you some options of what you can do with your blocks once you have sewn them all together. So I'm going to pause the recording again, and hopefully this time I will remember to switch it back on again to answer questions or have you ladies show your blocks.
Because you have to allow.
Yeah.
You have to allow for the seam.
Yes. Okay. The question asked was how much fabric do we need for our borders? And so what you're going to do is you are going to take all the way around your snowman. You're going to take a measurement, but then you have to allow for a little bit extra for joining your strips of fabric. And if you're going to do a mitered corner, that takes a little bit extra fabric. Okay.
Well, couldn't we just cut, like the length of my snowman is 18 inches. So couldn't I just cut a 3.5 inch border, the width of the fabric, which
Yes.
is, and just add that
top and bottom?
Yeah.
Yes, you could. And then you're going to need to add the sides too. So you're going to need,
Right.
or you might actually have enough fabric. You might not. You might need 1 second strip.
right, because I wasn't thinking about making one strip of fabric going around
No.
the
Exactly.
snowman.
You don't have to. It depends on what fabric you're using. Let's say, for example, you were using a fat quarter for your border. All right, you might then have to cut a whole lot of strips and join them together. But if you're using a full width of fabric, you're quite right. You probably don't need to join them.
So does this have a binding on
Mhm.
it, or do you turn it?
Well, that's a very good question, Carol. You've got options. I chose on both of mine to bind them. But
Okay.
there are a lot of people who, when they make a table runner, and I'm actually one of those, because I've had a friend knock over a cup of coffee on the table, because you get that little ridge with the binding, or a wine glass, and it can topple over if it's put, sort of on the edge of your runner. So you've got the option of doing a different type of edging. My favorite would be where you cut your backing and you lay it right sides together with your finished bound with a border runner. And then you're going to sew all the way around the edge, leaving an opening of perhaps 5 or 6 inches. And then you will flip it out, obviously trim your corners a bit so there's not so much bulk there. Then poke the corners gently and then press it very well and make sure that the section that was not sewn is pressed inwards very neatly. And then you might want to hand sew that little opening closed, but then I come back and I do a top stitching about a 1/4 to a 1/2 inch in from the edge. That I think is called the envelope style. And then what you might want to do is do a line of quilting all the way around the actual snowman and then down between each panel, just in the ditch. So it's not very obvious. And that's also a lovely way to finish your project. So actually then you're not really doing a binding at all.
Right. Even with the binding, you'd have to do some kind of a stitch in the ditch or something for the back.
Absolutely. And that you would do obviously once you'd sandwiched the quilt.
Right.
And trimmed it, and then you would add that binding. So you would do the quilting and then last of all your binding. There is another way of doing it as well. There's another method. I'm just trying to think what it's called. A facing. You can also do a facing around your quilts. I've only done it once or twice, so I'm not terribly familiar with how to do it. It's a little more fiddly, I think, but maybe that's simply because I have only done it once or twice, and so I'm not terribly familiar with it. But that then ends up, you don't have that binding ridge around the edge, but you have a piece on, let me just switch the camera back to me. Okay, so you have a piece on the back, however wide your facing is, you're going to have a flat piece on the back. And if I remember correctly, you add it to 2 sides and then turn it over, and then you add it to the other 2 sides and turn it over. So the corners are slightly overlapped at the back, or you can mitre them on the back. And then that's an alternative method, but obviously it's got to be stitched down. So in this instance, depending on how wide your border is, you might be able to stitch it down by machine. Otherwise, if it's coming over the edge of the snowman, you'd probably have to hand stitch it so that you wouldn't see that stitching on the front. And obviously, if you're going to have this as a wall hanging, you probably want to also think in terms of a sleeve, so that you've got like a rod pocket on the back for your quilt. So these are all considerations you will make in determining how you're actually going to finish your project.
So for our batting, for our table runner, are we going to use the same batting that we used for our snowman? That was
I did. Yes, I did. Again, Jenny, it's a good question because you've got 2 options. Remember, I said that if you did the sashing like I did on the indoor plants, I cut little strips and put them down on the back. And then I could do the same for the border as well. And I would definitely be using spray glue to hold that in place. I don't think you need to go to fusible web, but your spray glue would be good because you are going to then put the backing on and you're going to do a little bit of quilting. So that's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is not to worry about putting those little bits of batting in, but just to cover the entire back of your snowmen plus borders with a sheet of batting. And I would just use the same as what I used, which happens to be 80-20, poly blend, cotton blend batting. It's what I've used for years and years and years, although I shan't be buying it again. I bought it from a supplier and bought a whole big bolt, and it was really very cheap. Well, I think she'd got it from a supplier that makes not the best quality, because there were, as I'm unrolling it, there's places where there's a little bit of, there's like, it's very thin, and sometimes there's even a hole. So I've got to sort of like smush it together so that I don't have a hole. So I don't think it was the best quality. So I won't buy from her again. But most battings, whether they are warm and natural, for example, that's one of them, which is 100% cotton. Normally I buy Hobbs Heirloom, and I buy the one that is 96 inches wide, and it comes on a bolt of 27 meters. It's a big outlay. I mean, we're looking at sort of $300-400 for that bolt of batting. But then I shove it into a closet in my house so that it's out of the way. And then I've got batting to last me for quite some time. It usually lasts me a couple of years, all that batting. But if you want to buy in smaller quantities, most quilting stores, I don't know of any quilting stores that don't sell batting. You can buy just one bat and it's rolled up like a sausage, and that would be for a queen, or you could buy them for lap quilts or whatever. And it, as I say, it comes usually, there's a whole range of different types of batting, but you will get it either in a 100% cotton, or you can buy wool batting, or you can buy the blend batting, which is 80% cotton, 20% polyester. I kind of like that because it doesn't shrink as much as the cotton and the wool, because it's got that little bit of polyester in it. And because I don't pre-wash my fabrics, I want my batting to sort of not shrink too much, because my quilt will be somewhat smaller if I'm using, say, a wool batting and fabrics that have not been pre-shrunk or pre-washed. There are also other battings like bamboo batting. I personally have not tried it. I've heard some people say it's really, really nice, but I can't vouch for that myself. What do you ladies think? What do you use?
80-20.
Yeah, yeah. And it's low loft. I very seldom will use the puffy polyester stuff. I've got some, but I very seldom use it. It's a bit slippery, and your quilt does end up being quite puffy. If that's what you want as a finished result, sure, then polyester is the way to go. What do you use, Jeannie?
I don't, well, when I make my quilts, I just send them in, and then the lady chooses what batting that she puts on it. But I have used warm and natural. But I was thinking, what I'm thinking is, I'm kind of confused. Like when you add the border, you're supposed to put the batting on the border too, so that
you've got options. You can do that, or you can just put a batting over the whole of the quilt. Obviously, the snowmen will be a little puffier, slightly puffier and thicker than your borders. If you don't want that, then yes, you'll need to put strips of scrap batting on your borders, and then put another sheet or not of batting. It just depends how thick you want it. If you're using it as a table runner, and maybe you'll have a teapot or some warm plates, hot plates on it, you might want to put 2 layers of batting.
Okay.
But it's not essential to put 2 layers, because all your snowmen have already got a layer of batting. So it's just really the borders that need to have batting added.
Okay. Okay, because I didn't want it to look funny if I didn't add the batting to the borders, but if that's all right, then I'll just do one batting on the backing, or whatever I choose for the backing. And then
if it's a wall hanging, I think that's perfectly okay.
Oh, I was gonna give it as a gift for, I wanted it to be like a table runner.
Okay. Yep. What I would do before I start quilting is just smooth it down on the table with your hands. And if you feel that the edges are a little bit thin, then just go back and peel the batting back a little bit and put a strip underneath where the border is, so that it's the same sort of thickness throughout. And that would be something that would be a preference on your part.
Okay.
Right. Any other questions?
No, I think I understand now.
Mhm.
And how wide do you cut your binding?
I'm gonna cut my binding 3.5 so that it's 3 inches all around.
Mhm.
You think that's too much?
Is that for your binding or your border?
My bind, it's my border. My
Oh,
border.
no, I don't think that's too much for a border. That's lovely.
Yeah.
And your binding, Carol, how wide do you make yours?
Usually 2.5.
Yeah, me too.
Yes,
I do mine
yes.
2.5.
Yes, binding, I'll do, binding, I usually do 2 inches or 2.5.
Yes.
Mhm.
Perfect. So that obviously is the next step after you have put your backing on and quilted in the ditch. I don't think it needs an awful lot of quilting. On my, actually, I did a little bit. I'm just going to switch back to the picture, the wall hangings. Okay, so you will see here on the snowman quilt, I've got maybe a 2-inch border. And I did do a line of quilting between the snowmen and the binding. I just did one line of quilting. And I just used my walking foot and just went all the way around, lining it up with the edge of the snowman. On this one, because I had quite a wide border, I did not want to leave that unquilted. So I think I had 3 rows of quilting here, and obviously not as many rows on the sides. So it just depends how you decide to put yours together. Obviously, my indoor plants is a wall hanging, but my snowman could very easily be a table runner, or it could be, as I plan to use it, a kind of hanging, what do you call those? Mantle something, scarf, mantle scarf. That's it. So it's going to hang from my mantle. I've got a big mirror above my mantle. We never use the fireplace because it's old and it sounds like a jumbo jet taking off in our lounge. It's very, very old. And we thought of replacing it. And we got somebody in to come and quote, I want the mirror off the wall. I want to put a quilt above the wall, above the mantle. And then getting a new mantle, sort of modernizing it a bit, and then have shelving down the sides. And that was going to cost $5,000. Oh, and a new fireplace. You know, those ones that you can put on there. They don't really generate much heat, but they look very beautiful. So more contemporary, and it was going to cost $5,000. And I looked at my husband and I said, you know what? For aesthetics, I don't think it's worth it. So we haven't done it. So I'll just pretty it up with my snowmen instead. And then on my mantle shelf, I've got a whole lot of carved wooden elephants. So snowmen and elephants are our Christmas things this year anyway. Okay, so ladies, are there any further questions? Because there's only just 2 of you, we've gone through this pretty quickly. So I'm more than happy to leave the camera open in case you have questions. But if you feel you don't really have any more questions and you want to say cheerio and just continue working on your own, you're also very welcome to do that. What would you like to do?
I'm fine. I go on now.
Yeah, and I'm fine with it. I think I understand what we have to do. And if not, I will be emailing you again.
Absolutely, no problem. And I will prepare this recording and I'll get it sent to you by Monday. Okay.
Okay, all right.
Thank you so much for tuning in, ladies, and have a wonderful Thanksgiving, Jeannie.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.